Today, I'm going to be talking about a Sherlock Holmes film series I never knew about from the 1930s, starring Arthur Wontner as Sherlock Holmes and Ian Fleming, no, not that one, as Dr. Watson. Today, I'll be reviewing the double film set, The Triumph of Sherlock Holmes and Silver Blaze. Are they worthy additions to the Holmes film history? And thank you for joining me for my review of The Triumph of Sherlock Holmes and Silver Blaze. It's a double feature set on Blu-ray. I just want to let you know, if you want to get this film, there is an affiliated Amazon link in the comments section and in the description, and that will help me keep this channel going. And another way to help me keep this channel going is signing up for my Patreon. We do a lot of different videos on there, not just DVD and Blu-ray reviews, and every little bit helps. It starts as low as $3 a month. Please consider joining my Patreon. That link is also in the description. Now, I'm a big fan of Sherlock Holmes, but by no means am I expert of knowing everything about Sherlock Holmes. So I personally never knew about this film series starring Arthur Wontner, and I'm hoping I'm even saying his name right. So that really goes to show how far out I am. I like my Sherlock Holmes generally from folks like Jeremy Brett, who I consider definitive, as well as Douglas Wilmer. I also really like, I do like the Basil Rathbone films, which is why this is a very interesting set of films for me to watch today. Obviously, I also like Tom Baker in the role, and even Peter Cushing. Peter Cushing actually, surprisingly, probably isn't my favorite. I think a lot of people love Peter Cushing as Sherlock Holmes. So this was something that I was completely unaware of in this film series. In fact, when I saw that this release was available, I personally thought that The Triumph of Sherlock Holmes and Silver Blaze were just two films that were made with the same cast. I couldn't have been more wrong. There's actually 5 films in this series going back to 1931, starting with The Sleeping Cardinal in 1931, The Missing Rembrandt in 1932, which happens to be a lost film, The Sign of 4, Sherlock Holmes' Greatest Case from 1932, and then the two that we're going to be talking about today, The Triumph of Sherlock Holmes and Silver Blaze. So this Triumph of Sherlock Holmes from 1935 and Silver Blaze from 1937. We'll talk about in a second what they did when we start creeping closer to the Basil Rathbone series that's coming up just a few years after Silver Blaze. Now, this disc that we're looking at is one disc. The Triumph of Sherlock Holmes is 75 minutes. Silver Blaze is 71. And this is released by Film Masters. It was released on January 7th of this year. Suggested retail price, $21.99. It's a Blu-ray, and it is region-free. It is actually a BDR 25, which I was actually surprised to find a BDR being released. And there isn't anything wrong with that, by the way. I just was actually a little surprised about that. Now, as far as the films, I want to start with The Triumph of Sherlock Holmes. Like I said, is from 1935 and is based off of the Sherlock Holmes story, The Valley of Fear. Sherlock Holmes is lured out of retirement to investigate a mysterious murder at Burlstone Castle. They discover that a group of coal miners calling themselves the Scowlers are caught up in the plot, along with the treacherous Professor Moriarty, played by Lynn Harding. Holmes must battle wits and might with Moriarty and an American gangster to find the murderers and save the Scowlers from destruction. The film, now, my thought on this film in particular, and I'm only talking about The Triumph of Sherlock Holmes right now. Now, I think this film is directed. It's very wooden direction. Okay, there's a lot of gaps, like in the scene. Like you start, in the scene, and it takes a second for dialogue to get going. Not totally unusual, but there's often gaps between someone says something and someone replies, or the conversation. It's just kind of it doesn't have a natural movement to it. And I understand that films of this period of time, especially early 30s, may come across this way as well.
If I may give you a word of advice, Mr. Balding, I should moderate your tone a little when you meet the professor.
Is that so? Hey, you! Wait a minute!
Who is now living in this country under an assumed name.
That is so.
And you wish the aid of my organization. What do you propose to pay?
$50,000.
Reasonable.
It just was very difficult to watch in places. A lot of pauses between dialogue, and some shots that they took were just not very interesting. But it changes actually about 10 minutes before the end of the film, which is really interesting. It's suddenly it almost like new people come in and they take on the film at that point, because it gets exciting. It gets exciting. I'll kind of talk about when that is, but the film is told in a lot of flashbacks, which take forever. And I know that the flashbacks are a big part of the Sherlock Holmes, anything with Sherlock Holmes, quite frankly. In particular, I know, like with the Jeremy Brett series, I recall a lot of flashbacks. And not having read a ton of Sherlock Holmes, to be perfectly honest, I would suspect that it's the same in there as well, but it takes forever. And it's you start to wonder what film you're watching, and it bored me, to be honest. And my first impressions of Arthur Wontner as Holmes is also one of someone just delivering his lines. Very much to me at the beginning of the film, through most of the film, I was kind of like, I don't feel like um, that this is actually like Sherlock Holmes. This is somebody playing the role, and that is literally about it. But once again, as I said, when we get to the climax of the film, things start to change quite a bit. And I don't know what had happened that everyone starts getting interested in this, but it's when Sherlock Holmes in the film, towards the end, starts being a detective, and he starts like really searching for clues. It comes alive, and leading up to the climax, which is pretty exciting, quite honestly. It kind of, you get set pieces that are very reminiscent of a Universal sort of horror film. Not quite the same quality, but there's some really good pieces to it. The ending makes things a lot better. Now, we also have Ian Fleming, and I mean the actor, not the creator of James Bond, is rather unmemorable as Watson. There is an ongoing gag in the film when Holmes meets somebody new and they introduce each other. Watson kind of nudges him to make sure that Holmes introduces him as well.
Possibly Mr. Douglas anticipated this crime.
Inspector Griffiths. This is Mr. Sherlock Holmes.
How do you do, sir? How do you do? Oh, this is my friend Dr. Watson. How do you do? How do you do?
It's fine, whatever. And I thought maybe that's just something in all the films. In the second one, it doesn't happen at all. But it's a very interesting way of doing that, and that gives a little bit of a character. But honestly, the first film I watched, Watson is just non-existent. And I know that you can kind of go through a lot of iterations of Watson. Some become more buffoonish over time. This one is just, at least in the Triumph of Sherlock Holmes, this one is just a little, non-existent. You could have the film without him, and it really doesn't matter. At least that's what I feel about it. And as often is the case in these early film productions, it's very stagey. The whole thing is very stagey, such as there's a scene with Jane Carr playing Eddie Douglas, one of the characters in the film, and she's recalling the never-ending flashback I talked about earlier to tell us the story of the movie. I mean, you do need that flashback because it really kind of fills in the entirety of the film, but it does take forever. But when she's telling the story, she is looking towards the camera, but in a, dramatic sort of way, not looking at it. And everybody is around her from behind her to listen to the story. There is nobody near the front of her at all. So it's funny that there is nobody around. It's almost like a sitcom from the 70s where, we don't want anything in front of the actor talking because there's a studio audience there or something. Very interesting, very, very stagey. But nevertheless, once again, I think that's more of a matter of how films are made back then. And it's, in some ways, there is a bit of a charm about that as well. Now, a fun fact about Jane Carr is that she was married to John Donaldson Hudson, and he was one of the partners in the John Logie Baird Limited Company. Now, as you all know, or you may not know if you haven't been here before, but I'm a researcher and a big fan of British television. John Logie Baird was one of the first pioneers of television in the UK. And so she was married to John Donald Hudson, who was one of the partners to John Logie Baird. And Jane Carr's face appeared as one of the first images to be shown as a BBC television image on the 15th of November 1932 using an apparatus designed by John Logie Baird, which is really cool. Now, if you know your history, you know that John Logie Baird's television system, never made it. So, but Jane Carr is part of television history in a very big way. Now, I also want to talk about the second film on the set, which is Silver Blaze from 1937. This is based off of the 1892 short story, The Adventure of the Silver Blaze, and also brings in a character from The Hound of the Baskervilles, which kind of threw me, quite frankly. Now, Sherlock Holmes takes a vacation and visits his old friend, Sir Henry Baskerville. His vacation ends when he suddenly finds himself in the middle of a double murder mystery and a missing horse, of all things. All right. So to me, this film is better in every way to the Triumph of Sherlock Holmes. Thank goodness. It has a faster pace to it. The dialogue and acting is a lot better. It's a lot tighter. Everything about this is a lot tighter. It's centered around horse racing, and there's a lot of excitement going on around here. Some of it, I'm sure, is stock footage. Some of it they shot in certain areas, but it moves quickly, and the whole film is just rather fun. I really enjoyed it quite a bit. Now, Wontner is quite good throughout the whole film as Holmes, so much better than he was in the last film, and that made me feel real good because I really don't try to look at reviews in a negative sort of way. I try to see the positive in everything, and it just was very clear that Wontner was given not a whole lot. In my mind, did not get a whole lot in the Triumph of Sherlock Holmes. Now, Silver Blaze is a very different story. And they also give Ian Fleming's Watson a lot more to do in this. He's not a bumbling sidekick, and he plays a big part in the climax of the film. So, I mean, overall, everything just seems to be working a lot better. Now, this is going to sound very strange. And if you get this set, listen to the way, and you may or may not know, I'm a big Doctor Who fan. Listen to the way that Wontner talks and that he portrays Holmes. To me, he sounds almost uncanny to the way that William Hartnell delivers his lines in Doctor Who, in some of the way he does it, which I found very interesting.
This must date well back into the past, Watson. I suggest these are the remains of the old outer fortification. Yes, obviously.
And maybe it's just me, but to me, it sounds like him. If you get this and you're a Doctor Who fan, I'd check it out. Now, in the United States, the film was released in 1941 by Astor Pictures, where it was also known as Murder at the Baskervilles, which is important because it was retitled by distributors to capitalize on the success of Basil Rathbone's film, The Hound of the Baskervilles. So I had wondered, where does all that play into each other? There we are. Now, we haven't talked about Professor Moriarty in both films, played by Lynn Harding. Now, he is quite an interesting take on the character, being very much kind of in the background in both films. But the thing is, Holmes suspects him immediately in each film, like right from the start, like the second sentence when somebody comes to Holmes and it's like, we got a problem, Mr. Holmes. And he's just literally like, oh, it's Moriarty. It's just like, all right.
My dear Watson, I appreciate your thought of me. I wouldn't dream of going if I were not convinced that Moriarty is behind all this.
Not your Professor Moriarty?
Yes, Lestrade, Professor Moriarty.
My dear Mr. Holmes, you're beginning to see his hand in everything.
It's tough because Sherlock Holmes is not only about Moriarty, and I know that this isn't the only film series to get wrapped up in that. And it's also sort of a shame how Moriarty is used in these films. I feel like Moriarty in these two films is more of a glorified mob boss, opposed with heavies that work with him.
The car ready in 15 minutes.
Very good, Professor. Are we out for a long run?
Yes, we've got to be back in Devon well before midnight. And Prince, we'll need the gun.
Okay.
And opposed to someone who's more calculating and clearly, on the same wits as Sherlock Holmes. It's almost like, I don't know, like a Batman villain going up against the Batman, that it's not exactly a even keel there, which I always thought of Moriarty and Sholmes. I always thought of Moriarty and Holmes being very much equal in that regard. So, but Lynn Harding is really good, a little over the top, but maybe that's something that the film needs, especially with the Triumph of Sherlock Holmes. It needed something to have some life in it. And the film is contemporary to the time it was made. And, because I had wondered if to myself, was the Basil Rathbone series the first to do that? And it made me wonder also what Sherlock Holmes media was the first to be contemporary to the time it was made. And then I started laughing at myself. Obviously, that would be the originals, right? The original ones that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle had written. They were contemporary to the time that he wrote them. Let's talk about the quality of the films of this set. Now, these films are in public domain, and I'd be surprised if any negatives for the film series exist, or if they're even available. So to me, to my eye, that these have been sourced by a Positive Film Print and may have had some work done. The grading between shot to shot is often very inconsistent, like very noticeable. Like for example, there's one scene where the contrast is good, and the next it's blown out, and I'm not quite sure what that is and why that is. And I read elsewhere that it looks like that there's a possible fake film grade added throughout the film. That didn't personally stand out to me. I read it somewhere else because film grade didn't really play into it when I watched personally. I do wonder if some overall filter is applied to these films. So that kind of means one style fits all. So if you get into any sort of variation throughout the shots, it's going to really affect some shots a lot more than others, and often in a very inconsistent and nasty sort of way. And I kind of feel like that. And, so I didn't notice a whole lot of wear and tear on the film prints themselves. There didn't seem a whole lot of damage. But when there was some strangeness, it was pretty strange. The film would suddenly jump, like within a shot. like there's either something cut out or there was a rip and they had to repair it. And so there'd be like probably in the Triumph of Sherlock Holmes, there'd probably about 3 of them at least. In Silver Blaze, I recall like 1. And it's just a nasty jump, and sometimes the audio doesn't always catch up right away. I don't look at that as a fault, because I am sure that these film prints are just, that they're old, and you don't have a lot of choices where you're going to get these from. And I could be wrong. I can't imagine that these are being stored, by a big archive. This is probably on a much smaller scale. Now, Silver Blaze is by far the better quality of the 2 films. When getting done with the Triumph of Sherlock Holmes, I was, as far as the overall process of this, I was kind of like unsure if I even wanted to keep going. Everything was kind of working against it right from the start. Silver Blaze was just immediately, you could see as a better film print, a better quality film. And so that really helped it quite a bit. The extras on this release, there are none. There are no extras on here. And I don't fault it. To me, the extra is the Triumph of Sherlock Holmes, because Silver Blaze is such a better film that is like, I'll just throw on the Triumph of Sherlock Holmes. Of course, that's not true. But yeah, I just really prefer Silver Blaze over the other one. Like I said, no extras to this. Personally, for me, that's not a deal. That's not a deal killer, because if I want to see a film, I much rather have the film. I much rather have it in decent quality than loading up a disc with a lot of extras. I love extras, but I also like really good quality as well. So I find that to be important when these releases come out. So, no extras, but 2 films reasonably priced. That's okay for me. Now the cover, and I will talk about covers because those are important to me. I design covers for a DVD and Blu-ray range in the UK, and I really think that this cover is quite nice. It's very simplistic, which is and it's a very easy way to let us know that this is Sherlock Holmes, and very much. I was going to say it really tells me it's from the 30s. To be honest, it actually tells me. To me, it looks like it's from the 20s. But I get the point. It's a very vintage-looking cover. It looks really good. And to me, simple is always better. The back cover, there's a screen grab for the picture there. But honestly, I can't imagine that there's a whole lot of stills available for this film series. Maybe there isn't. Maybe they could have put a film poster on the back or 2, but it's fine. It looks good. There are some misspellings in the back cover. When the word black, BLACK, is misspelled twice on the back cover. Now, like I said, as someone who makes DVD covers for studios, I have made this mistake too. And it's tough when there isn't it's tough when there isn't the people power to double check others' work, because when you're designing this stuff, you get so caught up in it and you're so close to it, you miss the spellings. So, is it unfortunate? Yeah, it happens. And when you have boutique studios like this releasing DVDs and Blu-rays, you're going to have to just be patient with them, because it might be the only way that you're going to get some of this stuff as well. Overall thoughts on this release is that if I were just to base my review on the Triumph of Sherlock Holmes, I might tell you to give this a pass. It's not worth it unless you're a real big Holmes fan. But when you have Silver Blaze and then you have the Triumph of Sherlock Holmes on it, makes it a lot better. To me, that's how big of the difference the 2 films are. And so in my rating, I will go I'll say something is either highly recommended, watchable or not recommended. With Triumph of Sherlock Holmes, if it was by itself, after I was getting done watching that film first, I would say that this review is watchable, that it's something worth getting. Now, watching it as well as watching Silver Blaze, I would say this is recommended. That if you're a Sherlock Holmes fan, this is worth giving a watch. But I would say if you are someone getting into Sherlock Holmes and you'd like to watch some films of Sherlock Holmes, to me, there's a lot of better choices than this. This is something more if you are a fan of British film from the 1930s, give this a go. But if you are literally like, you know what, I really enjoy Sherlock Holmes, like, the Basil Rathbone and stuff like that, and I haven't seen a whole lot, I would personally point you to other directions. But at the price point that this is, and the number of films on there, and the work that they did on it, that they could do on it, probably, you're dealing with not the greatest source material to begin with. I recommend this. And I just also want to say that check out my channel and subscribe to my channel. We have a lot of different videos, a lot of British television videos, British television review videos, but also my favorite, a video series called Doctor Who on BBC Video, looking at Doctor Who being released on VHS back in the mid-'80s into the early 21st century. Please give that a look. My next review that I'm going to give from the Wontner Archive collection is going to be the 4K release of The Searchers. Did I like it? I'd like to know if you liked it. That's my next release. Thank you for joining me.